A wealthy tech millionaire hired a poor woman to be his girlfriend, but when she spoke at dinner, Mason Aldridge stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his luxurious penthouse, gazing out at the glittering New York City skyline. At 38, he was the epitome of success, a self-made tech mogul who had revolutionized the world of AI and robotics. His company, Axiom Innovations, was a beacon of technological advancement, its name synonymous with cutting-edge innovation. From humble beginnings in a poor family with 2 sisters and a younger brother, Mason had always dreamed of a better life. His passion for technology had been evident from a young age. At just 14, he started building simple robots from spare parts found in local junkyards. His fascination only grew stronger, leading him to earn a scholarship to study computer science at MIT. At MIT, Mason's brilliance shone brightly. He wasn't just a student, he was a visionary. His projects often left his professors in awe, and it wasn't long before tech companies began to take notice. However, it was a heartbreak during his college years that truly fueled his drive for success. A woman he loved deeply left him for someone wealthier, making Mason vow never to let anyone else dictate his worth again. After graduation, Mason joined a leading tech firm where he quickly climbed the ranks, but the entrepreneurial spirit within him pushed him to leave the company and start his own venture. Axiom Innovations was born in a small garage, much like the tech giants of the past. Mason's relentless work ethic and innovative ideas propelled the company to new heights, making it a powerhouse in the tech industry. Despite his professional achievements, Mason's personal life remained devoid of warmth. But he lived alone, his only companion being Maria, his loyal housekeeper, who had been with him since the early days of Axiom Innovations. Maria cooked, cleaned, and took care of Mason's daily needs, but she could never fill the void in his heart. Mason found solace in books, particularly science fiction and classic literature. Every evening he would sit by the large window in his penthouse, lost in the world of his favorite stories. His reclusive lifestyle kept him away from the social spotlight, making him an enigma to the media and the public. He rarely gave interviews, and when he did, he spoke only about his work. This aura of mystery only added to his allure, making him one of the most desirable bachelors in the city. However, Mason had little interest in relationships. The pain of his past heartbreak still lingered, and he was wary of letting anyone get too close. He had built walls around his heart, believing that love and business were incompatible. He was unwilling to risk his hard-earned success for the sake of companionship. Axiom Innovations headquarters, a sleek high-rise with glass walls and state-of-the-art facilities, mirrored Mason's ambition and commitment to excellence. Inside, the atmosphere was a blend of intense focus and creative energy, driven by a team that shared Mason's passion for innovation. The company specialized in artificial intelligence and robotics, leading the charge in developing next-generation technologies. From automated personal assistants to advanced industrial robots, Axiom's innovations were transforming industries and daily life. Mason's daily routine was unvarying. He would wake up early, head to the office, work late into the night, and then return to his penthouse. His only respite was the time he spent reading. His collection of books ranged from classic literature to the latest science fiction novels, providing him a temporary escape from the pressures of his world. As he stood there, looking out at the city he had conquered, Mason couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. His penthouse, though luxurious, often felt cold and lifeless. The sprawling space filled with modern art and the latest gadgets lacked the warmth of human connection. He had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of professionally, but personally, he was still that young man from MIT, nursing a broken heart. Little did Mason know that his life was about to change dramatically. The carefully constructed walls around his heart were about to be challenged by an unexpected encounter. The man who thought he had everything was about to discover what he had been missing all along. As the city lights twinkled below, Mason Aldridge, the tech mogul who had revolutionized the world of AI, was on the brink of his own personal revolution, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, love, and the price of happiness. The rhythmic tapping of Mason's fingers on his desk echoed through his spacious office. His eyes were fixed on the email displayed on his holographic screen, brows furrowed in concentration. The message was from Eduardo Mendoza, a prominent figure in the European tech industry known for his sharp business acumen and traditional values. Eduardo's interest in collaborating with Axiom Innovations represented a significant opportunity, one that could propel Mason's company into European markets and bring in substantial investments. However, the email contained an unusual stipulation that had thrown Mason into a quandary. To Eldridge, the email read, "I look forward to discussing potential collaboration opportunities over dinner next week. As is my tradition, I expect this to be a social event where we can get to know each other beyond our professional facades. Please bring your significant other to join us. My fiancée, Sophia, will also be in attendance." Mason leaned back in his chair, a mix of frustration and anxiety washing over him. A significant other. The concept seemed almost alien to him after years of solitude. He had no partner to bring, nor did he have the time or inclination to start a relationship. The intercom on his desk buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Aldridge," his assistant's voice came through. "I have Eduardo Mendoza's office on the line. They're asking to confirm the dinner arrangements." Mason took a deep breath. "Tell them I'll get back to them shortly, Clara," he replied, his mind racing to find a solution. As the day progressed, Mason found himself increasingly distracted by the dinner dilemma. During a meeting with his RD team, he caught himself staring blankly at the prototype of the latest AI-powered home assistant, bare registering the excited explanations of his engineers. That evening, as he sat in his penthouse, Mason contemplated his options. He could decline the dinner invitation, potentially losing a valuable business opportunity. He could attend alone, risking offending Eduardo's traditional sensibilities. Or he could find a way to meet Eduardo's expectations. An idea began to form in Mason's mind, one that went against his usual methodical approach to problems. What if he could find someone to play the role of his partner for the evening? It seemed absurd, like something out of a romantic comedy, but the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like a viable solution. The next morning, Mason called Clara into his office. "I need you to compile a list of potential candidates," he said, his tone serious. "Professional, well-mannered individuals who can handle themselves in a high-stakes business environment. We're looking at a temporary arrangement for the dinner with Eduardo Mendoza." Clara, ever efficient, nodded without questioning her boss's unusual request. "I'll get right on it, Mr. Aldridge. Any specific qualifications you're looking for?" Mason paused, considering. Intelligence, poise, and the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected situations. Someone who can convincingly play the role of a partner to a tech CEO. Over the next few days, Mason met with several candidates Clara had screened. Each interaction left him feeling more frustrated than the last. One candidate was too nervous, stumbling over her words. Another was overly enthusiastic, her forced laughter grating on Mason's nerves. A third seemed more interested in the potential publicity than in the task at hand. As the dinner date drew nearer, Mason's anxiety grew. He had built his career on careful planning and meticulous execution. This charade felt reckless, a departure from everything he stood for. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner could be a turning point for Axiom Innovations. 3 days before the dinner, Mason decided to take a break from the fruitless interviews. He left his office earlier than usual, his head pounding from the stress. As he walked down the busy New York street, he found himself drawn to a small, quaint coffee shop he had never noticed before. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped him as he stepped inside. The shop was busy, filled with the chatter of customers and the hiss of espresso machines. Mason joined the queue, absently scrolling through emails on his phone. "What can I get for you today?" a cheerful voice asked. Mason looked up, ready to give his usual order for a plain black coffee. The words died on his lips as he met the gaze of the barista. She had striking blue eyes that seemed to sparkle with intelligence and warmth. Her long dark hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a name tag that read Ava. For a moment, Mason forgot where he was. There was something about Ava that caught his attention in a way no one had in years. She handled the busy counter with grace and efficiency, her smile never wavering even when faced with difficult customers. As he watched her work, an idea began to form in Mason's mind. It was crazy, impulsive, and completely out of character for him. But as the dinner with Eduardo Mendoza loomed ever closer, Mason found himself willing to take a risk. When Ava handed him his coffee, Mason made a split-second decision. "Excuse me, miss," he began, his heart racing. Ava turned back to him, her eyebrow raised in curiosity. "Yes, is there something else you need?" Mason took a deep breath. "I have a rather unusual proposition for you," he said, his voice low to avoid being overheard. "My name is Mason Aldridge, and I'm in need of someone to accompany me to an important business dinner. I'm willing to compensate you generously for your time." Ava's eyes widened in surprise, a mix of confusion and intrigue crossing her face. For a moment, Mason thought she might call security or simply laugh in his face. But then, to his astonishment, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity, "that is indeed an unusual proposition. May I ask why you're asking me, a complete stranger?" Mason found himself at a loss for words, an unusual experience for the typically articulate CEO. How could he explain that in the brief moments of their interaction, he had seen in her the poise and adaptability he had been searching for? As the line behind him grew, and curious glances were thrown their way, Mason made another impulsive decision. "Perhaps we could discuss this further after your shift," he suggested, handing her his business card. "If you're interested, of course." Ava took the card, studying it for a moment before tucking it into her apron pocket. "All right, Mr. Aldridge," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "You've piqued my curiosity. I finish at 7. We can talk then." As Mason left the coffee shop, clutching his untouched coffee, he felt a mix of relief and trepidation. He had potentially found a solution to his dinner dilemma, but he had also just taken a step into unknown territory. So little did he know that this impulsive decision would set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever. As the clock struck 7, Mason found himself back at the coffee shop, his heart racing with an unfamiliar mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The bustling atmosphere of the daytime had given way to a more relaxed ambience, with soft jazz playing in the background and the warm glow of pendant lights creating a cozy setting. Ava emerged from the back room, her work apron replaced by a simple but elegant blouse and jeans. She spotted Mason and made her way over, her blue eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of amusement. "Mr. Aldridge," she greeted him, sliding into the seat across from him. "I have to admit, I've been wondering all day if you'd actually show up." Mason smiled, feeling oddly at ease despite the unconventional situation. "I always keep my appointments, Ms. Harper," she supplied. "Ava Harper." They began to talk. Mason found himself captivated by Ava's presence. She was articulate and quick-witted, matching his intellectual banter with ease. There was a depth to her that intrigued him, hinting at a story beyond her role as a barista. "So, Mr. Aldridge," Ava said, leaning forward slightly, "why don't you tell me more about this unusual proposition of yours?" Mason took a deep breath and explained the situation with Eduardo Mendoza, the important business dinner, and his need for someone to accompany him. As he spoke, he couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Ava's expression, a raised eyebrow here, a thoughtful nod there. "Let me get this straight," Ava said when he finished. "You want to hire me to pretend to be your girlfriend for a business dinner?" Put so bluntly, the idea sounded even more outlandish to Mason's ears. "I know it sounds crazy," he admitted, "but there's something about you, your poise, your quick thinking, that makes me believe you could pull this off." Ava was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. "You don't know anything about me," she said quietly. "That's true," Mason acknowledged. "But I'm a good judge of character. It's part of what's made me successful in business." Ava's eyes met his, and for a moment, Mason saw a flicker of something, pain, fear, before it was quickly masked. "You might be surprised," she murmured. There was a story there, Mason realized, a past that Ava kept carefully hidden behind her cheerful barista persona. But before he could ponder it further, Ava spoke again. "All right, Mr. Aldridge, I'm intrigued, but I have some conditions of my own." Mason nodded, relieved that she was considering the offer. "Of course, name them." "First," Ava said, holding up a finger, "this is a one-time deal. No matter how well it goes, I'm not signing up to be your permanent fake girlfriend." "Agreed," Mason said quickly. "Second, I want a contract. Something that clearly outlines the terms of this arrangement and protects both of us." Mason was impressed by her foresight. "That's very sensible. I'll have my lawyers draw something up." And third, Ava hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I want you to match whatever you're paying me with a donation to the children's hospital. My younger brother, he's been sick for a long time. They've done a lot for him." The request caught Mason off guard. It was not what he had expected, and it hinted at depths to Ava's character that he hadn't anticipated. "Consider it done," he said softly. With the terms agreed upon, they began to discuss the details of the upcoming dinner. As they talked, Mason found himself increasingly drawn to Ava. She was intelligent and perceptive, quickly grasping the nuances of the business world he inhabited. What Mason didn't know was the internal struggle Ava was facing as they spoke. Behind her composed exterior, a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions raged. Ava Harper had once been a promising medical student, her dream of becoming a doctor within reach. But a tragic car accident 2 years ago had changed everything. The accident had left her with temporary amnesia, forcing her to drop out of medical school. As her memory slowly returned, so did the crushing reality of her situation: mountains of medical debt and a younger brother, Tommy, battling a chronic illness. With her medical career derailed, Ava had taken whatever job she could find to make ends meet. The coffee shop job was just one of 3 she juggled, barely managing to keep her head above water. The idea of pretending to be the girlfriend of a wealthy CEO felt like a script from a movie, not her real life. But as she listened to Mason talk about his company and the importance of this dinner, Ava saw an opportunity. The money from this job could make a real difference, paying off some of her debts, covering Tommy's next round of treatments, and the donation to the hospital that could help other families like hers. Till there was a voice in the back of her mind warning her about the risks. What if someone recognized her? What if her past somehow came to light? The life she had carefully reconstructed since the accident was fragile, and this charade could shatter it. Yet looking at Mason, his earnest expression, the passion with which he spoke about his work, Ava felt a strange sense of trust. Perhaps it was foolish, but something told her that this man would keep his word. "All right, Mr. Aldridge," Ava said, making her decision. "I'm in. Let's create the perfect girlfriend for your business dinner." Mason's face lit up with relief and excitement. "Thank you, Ava. I promise you won't regret this." As they shook hands to seal the deal, neither Mason nor Ava could have predicted the journey they were about to embark on. Their worlds, so different yet about to collide, would never be the same again. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Mason arranged for a personal shopper to help Ava select an appropriate outfit for the dinner. They spent hours going over the details of Mason's life and work, crafting a believable backstory for their relationship. Ava proved to be a quick study, absorbing information about the tech industry and Mason's company with remarkable speed. Her medical background, though hidden, gave her an unexpected advantage in understanding some of the more complex aspects of Axiom's biotech projects. As they worked together, Mason found himself increasingly captivated by Ava. Her intelligence, her quiet strength, and the occasional glimpses of vulnerability she allowed him to see all combined to create a woman unlike any he had ever met. For her part, Ava was surprised by how much she enjoyed spending time with Mason. Behind his successful CEO facade, she discovered a man with a deep passion for innovation and a genuine desire to make the world better through technology. The night before the dinner, as they ran through final preparations in Mason's penthouse, Ava felt a moment of panic. "Mason," she said, her voice tight with anxiety, "what if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing and ruin this opportunity for you?" And Mason looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. "Ava," he said softly, "you won't. I've seen how brilliant and adaptable you are. You're going to be amazing." As their eyes met, something shifted between them. The touch of their hands, the softness in Mason's voice, the trust in Ava's eyes, it was more than just an act. In that moment, both of them felt the first stirrings of something real, something neither of them had been looking for. But as quickly as the moment came, it passed. Ava pulled her hand away, her cheeks flushed. "We should probably call it a night," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Big day tomorrow." Mason nodded, trying to shake off the unexpected feelings. "You're right, I'll have a car pick you up tomorrow evening." As Ava left the penthouse, both she and Mason were lost in thought. The lines between their arranged charade and genuine emotions were already beginning to blur, setting the stage for a dinner that would change both their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. The evening of the dinner arrived with a palpable sense of anticipation. Mason stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. His usual confidence was tinged with an unfamiliar nervousness. This dinner wasn't just about impressing Eduardo Mendoza, it was about pulling off an elaborate charade with a woman he barely knew. At precisely 7 p.m., there was a knock on his door. Mason took a deep breath, steeling himself before opening it. The sight that greeted him left him momentarily speechless. Ava stood before him, a vision in a midnight blue gown that accentuated her slender figure. Her dark hair was elegantly styled, cascading over one shoulder in soft waves. But it was her eyes that caught Mason's attention, bright, nervous, yet filled with determination. "Wow," Mason breathed, forgetting for a moment that this was all an act. "You look incredible." Ava smiled, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. CEO." As they made their way to the waiting car, Mason found himself hyper-aware of Ava's presence beside him. The subtle scent of her perfume, the soft rustle of her gown, it all felt startlingly intimate. Remember, Mason said as the car pulled away from the curb, Eduardo is old-fashioned. He values personal connections as much as business acumen. We need to convince him that we're a genuine couple. Ava nodded, her expression serious. "I've got this, Mason, trust me." The restaurant chosen for the dinner was one of New York's finest, known for its exclusivity and impeccable service. As they entered, Mason felt Ava's hand slip into his, a gesture that felt surprisingly natural. Eduardo Mendoza and his fiancée, Sofia, were already seated at a corner table. Eduardo rose as Mason and Ava approached, his imposing figure softened by a warm smile. "Mason, my friend," Eduardo greeted, his accent rich and welcoming. "So good to finally meet you in person." His eyes turned to Ava, curiosity evident in his gaze. "Eduardo, Sofia, allow me to introduce Ava Harper," Mason said, his hand resting lightly on the small of Ava's back. "My partner." Ava stepped forward, her smile radiant. "It's a pleasure to meet you both. Mason has told me so much about you." As they took their seats, Mason marveled at Ava's poise. She exuded a quiet confidence that seemed to put everyone at ease. And the conversation flowed smoothly as they ordered their meals. Eduardo was genuinely interested in Axiom innovations, asking insightful questions about their latest projects and future plans. Mason answered confidently, detailing their advancements in AI and robotics. "Your work in neural interface technology is particularly fascinating," Eduardo commented. "The potential applications in medical field are extraordinary." Mason nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. We believe it could revolutionize treatment for a range of neurological conditions." As Mason spoke, he noticed Ava listening intently, her eyes bright with interest. When there was a lull in the conversation, she leaned forward slightly. "If I may," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I find the ethical implications of neural interface technology equally fascinating. How does Axiom approach the balance between technological advancement and potential privacy concerns?" Mason blinked, surprised by the depth of her question. Eduardo, too, looked impressed. An excellent point, Ms. Harper, Eduardo said, turning his full attention to Ava. What are your thoughts on the matter? For a moment, Mason felt a flicker of panic. This wasn't part of their preparation, but Ava didn't miss a beat. Well, she began, her voice growing more confident. While the benefits of such technology are undeniable, we must consider the potential for misuse. The idea of direct access to human thoughts and memories raises significant ethical questions. I believe companies like Axiom have a responsibility to not only develop the technology but also to establish robust safeguards and ethical guidelines for its use. Mason stared at Ava, amazed. Her response was thoughtful, articulate, and showed a deep understanding of the complexities involved in their work. Eduardo nodded approvingly. Very insightful, Ms. Harper. I couldn't agree more. Mason, you're fortunate to have a partner who understands the nuances of your work so well. As the dinner progressed, Ava continued to impress. She charmed Sophia with stories of New York's hidden art galleries, engaged Eduardo in a discussion about the future of sustainable technology, and seamlessly supported Mason's points about Axiom's projects. Mason found himself repeatedly caught off guard by Ava's knowledge and quick thinking. There were moments when he almost forgot this was all an act. The way Ava's hand occasionally brushed his, the fond glances she threw his way, the ease with which they seemed to communicate without words. As dessert was served, Eduardo leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile on his face. Mason, I must say I'm very impressed. Not just with your work at Axiom, but with you as a person. It's clear you have a strong vision for your company, and you've surrounded yourself with remarkable people. His gaze flickered to Ava, who smiled graciously. Thank you, Eduardo, Mason replied, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment wash over him. That means a lot coming from you. As the evening drew to a close, Eduardo pulled Mason aside while Sophia and Ava chatted. And you've got a special one there, Eduardo said, nodding towards Ava. Don't let her go. Mason felt a strange tightness in his chest as he looked at Ava, laughing at something Sophia had said. I don't intend to, he heard himself say, and was surprised to realize he meant it. The ride back to Mason's penthouse was quiet, both of them lost in thought. As the car pulled up to the curb, Mason turned to Ava. You were incredible tonight, he said softly. I can't thank you enough. Ava smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. It was my pleasure, Mason. I'm glad I could help. There was a moment of tension as they looked at each other, unspoken words hanging in the air between them. Then Ava leaned in and placed a soft kiss on Mason's cheek. Good night, Mason, she whispered, before slipping out of the car and disappearing into the night. Mason sat there for a long moment, his hand unconsciously touching the spot where Ava had kissed him. The evening had been a resounding success. Eduardo was impressed. The potential collaboration seemed almost certain, but as he made his way up to his penthouse, Mason realized that the triumph of the dinner wasn't what was occupying his thoughts. Instead, his mind was filled with Ava, the way she had seamlessly fit into his world, her insightful comments, the warmth of her smile. For the first time in years, Mason felt a longing for something more than business success. As he stood by the window of his penthouse, looking out at the city lights, Mason knew that something had fundamentally changed. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crumble, and at the center of that change was Ava Harper. But even as he acknowledged these growing feelings, a sense of unease crept in. This had started as a business arrangement, a charade. Ava had made it clear from the beginning that it was a one-time deal. And there was still so much he didn't know about her, the sadness he sometimes glimpsed in her eyes, the story behind her brother's illness. Mason Aldridge, the man who had built an empire on careful planning and calculated risks, found himself in uncharted territory. As he finally turned away from the window and loosened his tie, one thought echoed in his mind. What happens now? The dinner may have been a success, but it was clear that the real challenges and the real story were just beginning. The days following the dinner with Eduardo Mendoza were a whirlwind for Mason. The potential collaboration was moving forward, with teams from both companies already scheduling meetings to discuss the details. But amidst the business excitement, Mason found his thoughts continually drifting to Ava. He couldn't shake the memory of her that night, her intelligence, her grace, the way she had seamlessly integrated herself into his world. Against his better judgment, Mason found himself looking for reasons to see her again. A week after the dinner, Mason stood outside the coffee shop where Ava worked, hesitating before entering. He told himself he was just there to thank her again for her help, but deep down he knew there was more to it. As he pushed open the door, the familiar aroma of coffee enveloped him. Ava was behind the counter, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, laughing with a customer. When she saw Mason, her smile faltered for a moment before returning, a bit more reserved. "Mr. Aldridge," she greeted him as he approached the counter. "What brings you here?" Mason felt a pang at the formality in her tone. "I wanted to thank you again for your help with the dinner," he said. Eduardo was very impressed. "We're moving forward with the collaboration." Ava's face lit up. "That's wonderful news, Mason. I'm glad I could help." There was a moment of awkward silence before Mason spoke again. "Listen, Ava, I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner sometime to celebrate the success of our little charade." Ava hesitated, her blue eyes studying him intently. "Mason, I'm not sure that's a good idea. We agreed this was a one-time thing, remember?" Mason nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. "Of course I understand. I just thought." "Hey, Ava," a voice called from the back. "Your break started 5 minutes ago." Eva glanced over her shoulder, then back at Mason. She seemed to be wrestling with a decision. Finally, she sighed. "Okay, how about we grab a coffee now? I have a 15-minute break." The relief washed over Mason. "That sounds great." They settled at a small table in the corner of the shop, away from the bustle of customers. For a moment, neither spoke. The ease they had shared during the dinner seemingly evaporated. So Ava began, breaking the silence. "How are things at Axiom?" Mason launched into an explanation of the developments since the dinner, grateful for the safe topic. As he spoke, he saw Ava's genuine interest, the same spark of intelligence in her eyes that had captivated him before. "You know," he said, pausing, "I was really impressed by your understanding of our work. Your question about the ethics of neural interface technology, that's not something most people would think to ask." Ava's cheeks colored slightly. "I've always been interested in the intersection of technology and ethics, especially in the medical field." "Have you studied it?" Mason asked, curious. A shadow passed over Ava's face. I used to, before I started working here." Mason sensed there was more to the story, but Ava quickly changed the subject, asking about the potential applications of Axiom's latest AI project. As they talked, the awkwardness between them gradually melted away. Mason found himself once again drawn in by Ava's quick wit and insightful comments. Before they knew it, Ava's break was over. "I should get back to work," Ava said, glancing at her watch. "Of course," Mason replied, standing up. "Thank you for taking the time to talk." As Ava turned to leave, Mason called out, "Ava, that dinner invitation, the offer still stands. No strings attached. Just two friends celebrating a successful collaboration." Ava paused, then turned back with a small smile. "I'll think about it." Over the next few weeks, Mason found more and more reasons to visit the coffee shop. Each time, he and Ava would chat during her breaks, their conversations ranging from the latest tech innovations to their favorite books. Mason discovered that Ava shared his love for science fiction, and they often exchanged recommendations. Gradually, Ava's reserve began to thaw. She finally agreed to dinner, and soon their meetings extended beyond the coffee shop. They explored hidden bookstores in the city, attended tech talks together, and even volunteered at a local animal shelter, an activity Ava had introduced Mason to. As they spent more time together, Mason found himself opening up to Ava in ways he hadn't with anyone in years. He told her about his childhood, growing up in a poor family, and the drive that had pushed him to succeed. "I remember my first computer," he said one evening as they walked through Central Park. "It was ancient, salvaged from a junkyard. But to me, it was magic. I spent hours taking it apart, figuring out how it worked." Ava listened, her eyes soft with understanding. It must have been hard, coming from that background and ending up at MIT. Mason nodded. "It was. I felt so out of place at first. But that's where I learned that knowledge is the great equalizer. It didn't matter where I came from. What mattered was what I could do, what I could create. In turn, Ava began to share more about her own life. She spoke of her younger brother, Tommy, and his ongoing battle with a chronic illness. Mason could see the love and worry in her eyes when she talked about him. "He's the reason I work so hard," Ava admitted. "The medical bills, they're overwhelming sometimes." Mason felt a strong urge to help, to use his wealth to ease Ava's burdens. But he sensed that she was fiercely independent, proud of managing on her own. Instead, he listened, offering support in other ways, connecting her with resources, volunteering with her at fundraisers for the hospital. As their friendship deepened, Mason found his feelings for Ava growing stronger. She challenged him intellectually, made him laugh, and brought a warmth to his life that he hadn't realized was missing. For the first time since his heartbreak in college, Mason began to consider the possibility of a real relationship. But there were complications. Mason's family, particularly his sisters, were skeptical of Ava when they learned about her. They couldn't understand what their wealthy, successful brother saw in a coffee shop worker. "Are you sure she's not after your money, Mason?" his older sister, Rebecca, asked during a family dinner. "You have to be careful. There are plenty of women out there who would love to take advantage of you." Mason felt a surge of anger at the insinuation. "Ava's not like that," he said firmly. "She's one of the most genuine, hard-working people I've ever met. And for your information, she's been reluctant to accept even small gifts from me." His younger sister, Sarah, was more supportive. "I think it's great you found someone, Mason," she said. "You've been alone for too long. Just be careful with your heart, okay?" The family's mixed reactions added a layer of tension to Mason's growing feelings for Ava. He found himself caught between his desire to pursue a relationship with her and his family's concerns. Meanwhile, Ava was facing her own internal struggles. As she grew closer to Mason, she felt increasingly guilty about the secrets she was keeping from him. Her past as a medical student, the accident that had derailed her life, these were things she hadn't shared, afraid of how they might change Mason's perception of her. One evening, as they sat on a bench in the rooftop garden of Mason's penthouse, Ava finally broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Mason," she began, her voice hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you about my past." Mason turned to her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it, Ava?" Ava took a deep breath. "Before I started working at the coffee shop, I was a medical student. I was on track to become a doctor, but there was an accident. I lost my memories for a while, had to drop out. By the time I recovered, the medical bills had piled up, and I couldn't go back." Mason listened, stunned by the revelation. Suddenly, so many things about Ava made sense: her knowledge of medical ethics, her passion for helping at the hospital. "Ava, I'm so sorry," he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ava's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was afraid you'd see me differently, that you'd think I was damaged goods, or that I was hiding it to take advantage of you somehow." Mason felt a rush of emotion, sympathy for what Ava had been through, admiration for her strength in overcoming it, and a deep sense of care for the woman beside him. "Ava, look at me," he said gently. When she met his eyes, he continued, "Nothing about this changes how I see you. And if anything, it makes me admire you even more. You've been through so much, and yet you're still one of the most compassionate, intelligent people I know." Ava's tears spilled over then, and Mason pulled her into a hug. As he held her, he realized something profound. He was falling in love with Ava Harper. As they pulled apart, Mason cupped Ava's face in his hands. "Ava, I need you to know something too. These past weeks, getting to know you, they've meant more to me than I can express. I think I'm falling in love with you." Ava's eyes widened, a mix of joy and fear crossing her face. "Mason, I feel the same way, but I'm scared. Your world is so different from mine, and your family." Mason shook his head. "None of that matters. We'll figure it out together, if you're willing to try." For a moment, Ava was silent, and Mason felt his heart race with anticipation. Then, slowly she nodded. "I'm willing to try," she whispered. As Mason leaned in to kiss her, the city lights twinkling around them, both felt a sense of hope and possibility. But even as they embraced, the challenges they would face loomed on the horizon. Family disapproval, societal expectations, and secrets yet to be revealed. Their journey together was just beginning, and the road ahead would be far from smooth. As Mason and Ava's relationship blossomed, the world around them seemed to shift. The once lonely penthouse now echoed with laughter, and Mason found himself looking forward to evenings spent with Ava more than his time at the office. However, their newfound happiness was soon to be tested by a series of emerging conflicts that would shake the foundations of their relationship. The first tremor came in the form of an unexpected visitor to Axiom Innovations. Mason was in the middle of a meeting with his RD team when his assistant, Clara, interrupted with an urgent message. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, her voice tense, "there's someone here to see you. She says it's important." Mason frowned, not accustomed to unscheduled interruptions. "Who is it?" Clara hesitated before answering. "It's Emily Thornton, sir." The name hit Mason like a physical blow. Emily Thornton, his college sweetheart, the woman who had broken his heart and set him on the path that led to his current success. He hadn't seen or spoken to her in years. Excusing himself from the meeting, Mason made his way to his office, his mind racing. But what could Emily want after all this time? As he entered the room, he saw her standing by the window, her silhouette as familiar as it was foreign. She turned at the sound of the door, and Mason was struck by how little she had changed. The same golden hair, the same piercing green eyes. "Hello, Mason," Emily said, her voice soft. "It's been a long time." Mason steeled himself, determined not to let her see how much her presence affected him. "Emily, what brings you here?" So Emily moved closer, a hint of her old confidence in her stride. "I'm in town for a tech conference. I heard about your success with Axiom, and I wanted to see you." As they talked, Mason learned that Emily was now a successful venture capitalist specializing in tech startups. She spoke of her admiration for what he had accomplished, her regret for how things had ended between them. "I made a mistake, Mason," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Leaving you, it's the biggest regret of my life." Mason felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, confusion, and a faint echo of the love he once felt for her. But as Emily stepped closer, clearly intending to rekindle their past, Mason's thoughts turned to Ava, the sweet, brilliant Ava, who had brought light back into his life. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, taking a step back, "but I'm with someone now, someone I care about deeply." Emily's expression hardened for a moment before smoothing into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I understand, but I'm in town for a while. Perhaps we could catch up over dinner." "For old time's sake?" "Gee." Against his better judgment, Mason agreed to a friendly dinner. It was a decision that would come back to haunt him. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a constant presence in Mason's professional life. She attended tech events where Axiom was presenting, offered to introduce Mason to potential investors, and seemed to pop up at every turn. Her intentions became increasingly clear. She wanted Mason back. Ava noticed the change in Mason's behavior. He seemed distracted, often checking his phone during their time together. When she asked about it, Mason brushed it off as work stress, not wanting to worry her with Emily's reappearance. But secrets have a way of coming to light. At a charity gala for the Children's Hospital, an event Ava had encouraged Mason to sponsor, the carefully constructed facade came crashing down. Mason and Ava were mingling with donors when Emily appeared, resplendent in a shimmering gown. She made her way directly to Mason, ignoring Ava completely. "Mason, darling," Emily purred, placing a hand on his arm. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Ava stiffened beside him, her eyes darting between Mason and the beautiful stranger. Mason felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as he made the introductions. "Ava, this is Emily Thornton, an old friend from college. Emily, this is Ava Harper, my girlfriend." Emily's eyes widened in feigned surprise. "Oh, this is Ava. Mason's told me so much about you. It's lovely to finally meet the woman who's captured our Mason's heart." Possessive or hung in the air like a challenge, Ava, to her credit, maintained her composure, but Mason could feel the tension radiating from her. As the evening progressed, Emily made it her mission to monopolize Mason's attention, regaling the group with stories from their college days. Ava grew increasingly quiet, her usual vivacity dimmed. Later that night, in the safety of Mason's penthouse, the dam finally broke. "How long has she been back, Mason?" Ava asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "A few weeks. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, Ava, but I didn't want you to worry." "Worry?" Ava's laugh was bitter. "Mason, I watched my boyfriend spend an entire evening hanging on every word of his ex-girlfriend. The same ex-girlfriend he never told me was back in town. How am I supposed to feel?" As they argued, all of Mason's reassurances seemed to fall flat. The trust they had built was shaken, and for the first time since they'd gotten together, Ava left the penthouse angry and hurt. But Emily's return wasn't the only storm brewing on the horizon. As Axiom Innovations pushed forward with its neural interface technology, whispers of ethical concerns began to circulate in the tech community. It started with a series of articles questioning the potential misuse of technology that could essentially read human thoughts. Privacy advocates raised alarms about the implications for personal freedom and mental autonomy. Then, a whistleblower came forward with explosive allegations. The former Axiom employee claimed that the company had been conducting unauthorized tests, pushing the boundaries of ethical research in their race to perfect the technology. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Mason woke to a barrage of missed calls and urgent messages. By the time he reached the office, protesters had gathered outside the Axiom building, their signs decrying the company as thought police and mind invaders. As Mason and his team scrambled to address the allegations, the full weight of the crisis became clear. The whistleblower had provided documents that, while not definitively proving wrongdoing, cast a shadow over Axiom's research practices. Eduardo Mendoza, whose collaboration had been set to take Axiom to new heights, called for an emergency meeting. "Mason, my friend," Eduardo said, his face grave on the video call. "These allegations, they are very serious, and if there is any truth to them, I'm afraid we'll have to reconsider our partnership." Now Mason felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The company he had built from nothing, the work he had dedicated his life to, was threatening to crumble. In the midst of this professional crisis, Mason's personal life was faring no better. Ava, still hurt from the Emily situation, had become distant. When news of the Axiom scandal broke, she reached out, but their conversation was strained. "Mason, these allegations, tell me they're not true." Ava pleaded over the phone. Mason closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "It's complicated, Ava. There are aspects of our research that are sensitive, but we've always prioritized ethics. I don't know where these claims are coming from, but I promise you, I'm going to get to the bottom of it." Ava was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was filled with a sadness that broke Mason's heart. "I want to believe you, Mason, but lately it feels like there's so much I don't know about you, about your world. I need some time to think." As Mason threw himself into damage control at Axiom, he felt his personal and professional lives spiraling out of control. The media was having a field day with the scandal, digging into every aspect of Axiom's research and Mason's past. It was Emily who approached him with a potential solution. She had connections with a prominent tech journal and offered to help craft a narrative that would paint Axiom in a more favorable light. "Let me help you, Mason," she said, her hand on his arm. "We can get through this together, just like we used to." Exhausted and desperate, Mason agreed. It was a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. As Emily worked her PR magic, the narrative around Axiom began to shift. The whistleblower's credibility was questioned, and stories began to circulate about the potential life-saving applications of Axiom's technology. But even as the professional crisis showed signs of abating, Mason's personal life took another hit. Ava, who had been following the news closely, was troubled by the sudden shift in public opinion. "Mason, what's going on?" she asked when they finally met face to face. These stories praising Axiom, they seemed too perfect, too orchestrated. Mason hesitated, torn between his promise of honesty to Ava and his need to protect Axiom. "We've been working with a PR team to address the allegations," he said carefully. Ava's eyes narrowed. A PR team? Or Emily? The silence that followed was answer enough. Ava stood, her expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. "I can't do this anymore, Mason," she said softly. "I feel like I'm losing myself in your world, in all these secrets and half-truths. I need a break. I need to figure out who I am outside of this relationship." As Ava walked out of his life, Mason felt a pain deeper than any he had experienced before. He had gained back his company's reputation, but at what cost? In the following days, Mason threw himself into his work with a fervor that worried even his most dedicated employees. He worked around the clock, barely eating or sleeping, driven by a need to prove that Axiom's work was important, that it all meant something. It was during this time, as Mason teetered on the edge of exhaustion, that Ava made a discovery that would change everything. For worried about Mason despite their separation, she had been keeping an eye on the news about Axiom. Late one night, unable to sleep, Ava found herself deep in an online forum discussing the Axiom scandal. There, buried in pages of speculation and conspiracy theories, was a comment that made her blood run cold. The commenter, using an anonymous handle, claimed to have proof that the original whistleblower had been right and more. They alleged that Axiom had not only conducted unethical tests, but had actively covered up an accident that had resulted in a participant losing their memory. Ava's mind raced. The timing, the nature of the accident, it all fit with her own experience. Could it be possible that her life-altering accident was connected to Axiom, to Mason? As dawn broke over the city, Ava made a decision. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and composed a message to the anonymous commenter. Little did she know that her quest for answers would not only unravel the carefully constructed narrative around Axiom, but would also put her on a collision course with forces beyond her imagination. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and the very fabric of reality itself. The warm glow of her laptop screen illuminated Ava's face as she sat in her small apartment, scrolling through an endless stream of messages. It had been 3 days since she had reached out to the anonymous commenter, and the information she had received was overwhelming. Emails, chat logs, and redacted documents all pointed to a disturbing truth. Axiom Innovations had indeed been involved in her accident 2 years ago. As Ava pieced together the fragments of her past, a chill ran down her spine. The experimental neural interface technology, the memory loss, the cover-up, it all fit together like a nightmarish puzzle. But one question remained: how much did Mason know? Meanwhile, across the city, Mason was facing his own crisis. The Puerto Rico campaign orchestrated by Emily had temporarily quelled the media frenzy, but internally, Axiom was in turmoil. The board was demanding answers, and the threat of a federal investigation loomed large. Mason sat in his office, tie loosened, hair disheveled, staring at the city lights below. The empire he had built was teetering on the brink of collapse, and the woman he loved was gone. In that moment of despair, his phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop, 9 p.m. Ava." His heart raced as he read the message. Was this a chance to make things right? Or was it the final nail in the coffin of their relationship? At 8:55 p.m., Mason pushed open the door of the now familiar coffee shop. The usual bustle of customers was absent. The shop had closed for the night. In the dim light, he saw Ava sitting at their usual table, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Ava," Mason began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything. Was Axiom responsible for my accident?" Ava cut him off, her blue eyes piercing into his. The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Mason felt the blood drain from his face. "What? Ava, I don't understand." "Oh, don't lie to me, Mason." Ava's voice trembled with barely contained anger. "I know about the experimental trials, the memory loss, the cover-up. Was Axiom responsible?" Mason sank into the chair opposite her, his world crumbling around him. I didn't know. Not until recently. When the whistleblower came forward, I started digging. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid of losing you. Ava's laugh was bitter. Well, that worked out well, didn't it? As they talked, the full extent of the situation became clear. Axiom had indeed been conducting secret trials of their neural interface technology. Ava had been one of the volunteers lured by the promise of cutting-edge research and a generous stipend that would help pay for her brother's medical bills. The accident that had derailed her life was a result of a malfunction in the experimental device. "Why didn't you come forward when you found out?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason's shoulders slumped. "I was trying to protect the company, to protect the work we were doing. I thought I could make it right, find a way to help you without." Their conversation was abruptly cut short by the sound of breaking glass. Before either of them could react, the coffee shop was flooded with masked figures dressed in black. Mason Aldridge, a distorted voice called out, "You're coming with us." In the chaos that followed, Mason found himself being roughly dragged towards the exit. Through the haze of confusion and fear, he saw Ava struggling against her own captor. "Let her go," Mason shouted. "She has nothing to do with this." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. As he was shoved into a waiting van, the last thing he saw was Ava being forced into another vehicle. The next few hours were a blur of fear and confusion. Mason found himself in a dimly lit warehouse, tied to a chair, facing a group of individuals' faces were obscured by shadows. Mr. Aldridge, the same distorted voice from earlier, spoke. "We have some questions about Axiom's neural interface technology." As the interrogation progressed, it became clear that these weren't simple criminals looking for ransom. They were after Axiom's research, believing it to be far more advanced and dangerous than publicly known. "We know about the accident 2 years ago," the voice continued. "We know about the cover-up. What we want to know is, how far have you really gotten with mind control technology?" Mason's blood ran cold. Mind control. That's not what we're doing. Our research is aimed at helping people with neurological disorders, not controlling minds. A harsh laugh echoed through the warehouse. "Come now, Mr. Aldridge. We both know the potential applications of your technology go far beyond medical use. Governments, corporations, they pay a fortune for the ability to influence thoughts, to control minds." As the questioning continued, Mason's mind raced. Where was Ava? Was she safe? And how had these people gotten their information? Miles away, in another part of the city, Ava was facing her own ordeal. She found herself in what appeared to be an abandoned office building, surrounded by computer equipment and grim-faced individuals. Miss Harper, a tall man with a scar across his left cheek, addressed her. "I apologize for the rough treatment, but we needed to ensure your cooperation." "Who are you people?" Ava demanded, struggling against her restraints. "What do you want?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're a group of concerned citizens. We believe that Axiom's technology poses a grave threat to personal freedom and privacy, and you, my dear, are going to help us prove it." As the man explained their plan, Ava felt a chill run down her spine. They wanted to use her as a test subject to demonstrate the dangers of Axiom's neural interface technology to the world. "Your accident 2 years ago," the man continued, "was just the beginning. Imagine what they can do now with 2 more years of research and development." Ava's mind whirled. She thought of Mason, of the look in his eyes when he admitted to knowing about the accident. Was he truly ignorant of the full extent of Axiom's research, or had he been lying to her all along? Back in the warehouse, Mason was reaching the limits of his endurance. Hours of questioning had left him exhausted and desperate. "I've told you everything I know," he pleaded. "Whatever you think Axiom is capable of, you're wrong. We're not in the business of mind control." The shadowy figures conferred among themselves before the leader stepped forward. "Very well, Mr. Aldridge. Perhaps you need some motivation to jog your memory. Bring in the girl." Mason's heart stopped as Ava was led into the room, her face pale but defiant. "Ava, are you all right? Did they hurt you?" Mason called out, straining against his bonds. Ava's eyes met his, a mix of fear and determination in her gaze. "I'm okay, Mason." The leader's distorted voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Aldridge, Ms. Harper here is going to help us demonstrate the true capabilities of your technology. Unless, of course, you'd like to save her the trouble and tell us what we want to know." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Mason realized he was facing an impossible choice: reveal the deepest secrets of Axiom's research, secrets that, in the wrong hands, could indeed be dangerous, or watch as Ava was subjected to untested, potentially harmful technology. In that moment, looking into Ava's eyes, Mason made his decision. Axiom, his life's work, the company he had built from nothing, none of it mattered compared to Ava's safety. "Wait," Mason called out, his voice hoarse. "I'll tell you what you want to know. Just don't hurt her." As Mason began to speak, revealing the true extent of Axiom's research, a commotion outside the warehouse caught everyone's attention. The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Chaos erupted as their captors scrambled to escape. In the confusion, Mason managed to free himself and rushed to Ava's side. As they made their way towards the exit, the warehouse doors burst open, revealing a team of armed police officers. "Nipped, hands where we can see them." As the dust settled and they were led to safety, Mason and Ava clung to each other, the adrenaline of their ordeal slowly fading. But even as relief washed over them, both knew that their troubles were far from over. The police raid had been triggered by an anonymous tip, a tip that Mason strongly suspected came from Emily. Her connections and resources would have made it possible to track them down. But why? What was her endgame? As they sat in the back of an ambulance, shock blankets draped over their shoulders, Mason turned to Ava. "I'm so sorry," he began, his voice cracking, "for everything. I never meant for any of this to happen." Ava looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions, fear, relief, and something deeper, more complex. "I know, Mason. But where do we go from here? The truth about Axiom, about my accident, it's all going to come out now." Mason nodded, the weight of the future heavy on his shoulders. "You're right, and I'll face whatever consequences come, but right now all that matters is that you're safe." As the ambulance pulled away, its sirens cutting through the night, Mason and Ava sat in silence, both acutely aware that their lives had been irrevocably changed. The danger might have passed for now, but the revelations of the night had set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves, each other, and the fine line between technological progress and ethical responsibility. The city lights blurred outside the ambulance windows, a fitting backdrop to the uncertainty that lay ahead. For Mason and Ava, this was not the end of their ordeal, but merely the beginning of a new, more perilous chapter in their intertwined destinies. In the following days were a whirlwind of police statements, media frenzy, and corporate damage control. Mason and Ava found themselves at the center of a storm that threatened to tear apart everything they had known and believed in. As they sat in Mason's penthouse, now under constant security surveillance, the weight of recent events hung heavy in the air. Ava stared out at the city skyline, her mind still reeling from the revelations of the past few days. "I still can't believe it," she murmured, more to herself than to Mason. "All this time my accident, my lost memories, it was all connected to Axiom." Mason moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. The trust between them, once so strong, now felt fragile and tenuous. "Ava," he began, but was cut off by a sharp knock at the door. Both turned to see Clara, Mason's assistant, enter with a grave expression. "Mr. Aldridge, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." "Ah," Mason frowned. "Who is it?" "Eduardo Mendoza, sir." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eduardo Mendoza, the man whose investment had propelled Axiom to new heights, the man who had unwittingly brought Mason and Ava together. As Eduardo entered the room, his usual jovial demeanor was replaced by a seriousness that sent a chill down Mason's spine. "Mason, my friend," Eduardo said, his accent thicker than usual with emotion. "We need to talk." What followed was a conversation that would shake the foundations of everything Mason and Ava thought they knew. Eduardo revealed that his interest in Axiom had never been purely business-related. He had been searching for years for his long-lost daughter, given up for adoption in his youth before he had made his fortune. I hired private investigators, used every resource at my disposal, Eduardo explained, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. And then at that dinner I saw her, Ava, my daughter. The room fell silent as the implications of Eduardo's words sank in. Ava staggered back, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. "No," she whispered, "that's not possible. My parents." "Were your adoptive parents?" Eduardo finished gently. "I've had DNA tests done to confirm it. Ava, you are my daughter." As Ava grappled with this earth-shattering revelation, Mason felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The woman he loved, the daughter of his most important business partner, it seemed too incredible to be true. But the shocks were not over. Eduardo turned to Mason, his expression hardening. "I know about the experiments, Mason, know about Alva's accident. Did you know? Did you know who she was when you hired her for that dinner?" Mason's mind raced. The implications of Eduardo's accusation were staggering. "No. Eduardo, I swear I had no idea, and I didn't even know about Ava's connection to Axiom until recently." Eduardo studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I believe you, Mason, but this doesn't change the fact that my daughter was harmed by your company's actions." As the three of them grappled with the implications of these revelations, another player entered the scene. Emily, who had been suspiciously absent since the kidnapping, burst into the penthouse, her face flushed with a mix of triumph and fear. "Mason, I've been trying to reach you. I have information about she stopped short at the sight of Eduardo and Ava. What's going on here?" The tension in the room was palpable as Mason made the introductions. Emily's eyes narrowed as she looked at Ava, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "You," Emily said slowly, "you were part of the Axiom trials. I remember your file." Ava's head snapped up. "You knew? How?" Emily's composure cracked, and the truth came spilling out. She had been more than just Mason's college girlfriend. She had been involved with Axiom from the early days, working behind the scenes to push the boundaries of their research. "I was the one who suggested expanding the trials," Emily confessed, her voice trembling. "I knew the risks, but the potential breakthroughs, they seemed worth it." Mason stared at Emily in horror. "You knew about Ava's accident, about the cover-up?" Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Mason, I never meant for any make to hurt. When I heard about the whistleblower, I came back to try to fix things, to protect you and the company." The revelations kept coming, each one more shocking than the last. Emily had been the one to tip off the kidnappers, hoping to scare Mason into burying the truth about Axiom's research. But things had spiraled out of control, leading to the dangerous confrontation in the warehouse. So the full picture emerged. Mason felt as if he were seeing his life through a warped lens. The company he had built, the relationships he had formed, all of it was tainted by lies and hidden agendas. Ava, who had been silent through much of this, suddenly stood. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination. "Enough," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Enough secrets, enough lies. It's time for the truth to come out, all of it." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. Mason looked at her, seeing not just the woman he loved, but a strength and resilience he had never fully appreciated before. "You're right," he said, standing to join her. "No more cover-ups, no more half-truths. Whatever the consequences, we face them together." Eduardo nodded solemnly. "I will support you in this, both as a business partner and as family." Emily, tears still streaking her face, straightened her shoulders. "I'll turn myself in. I'll testify about everything I know." As the four of them stood there, united in their commitment to the truth, the first rays of dawn began to peek through the windows of the penthouse. It was a new day, both literally and figuratively, and with it came the promise of change. But even as they prepared to face the world and tell their story, new questions arose. How would the public react to the truth about Axiom's research? What would this mean for the future of the company and for the groundbreaking technology they had developed? And perhaps most importantly, How would these revelations affect the relationships between Mason, Ava, Eduardo, and Emily? Mason looked at Ava, seeing the turmoil in her eyes. She was no longer just Ava Harper, the barista he had fallen in love with. She was Ava Mendoza, daughter of Eduardo, survivor of Axiom's experiments, and now a key figure in a story that would likely reshape the tech industry. As for Mason himself, he knew that his days as the untouchable tech mogul were over. He would likely face legal consequences, potential ousting from his own company, and a long road to rebuilding trust, both personally and professionally. Yet, as he stood there with Ava by his side, facing an uncertain future, Mason felt a strange sense of liberation. The truth, as painful and complicated as it was finally out. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As they prepared to leave the penthouse and face the waiting storm of media and legal scrutiny, Mason took Ava's hand in his. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. Ava squeezed his hand, a small smile playing on her lips, despite the gravity of the situation. "No," she admitted, "but we'll figure it out, together." And with that, they stepped forward into the bright morning light, ready to write the next chapter of their extraordinary story. The days that followed the shocking revelations were a maelstrom of legal depositions, board meetings, and media scrutiny. Mason, Ava, Eduardo, and Emily found themselves at the center of a storm that threatened to reshape not just their lives, but the entire tech industry. As Mason sat in yet another tense board meeting, he could feel the weight of judgment from his fellow board members. The company he had built from the ground up was now teetering on the brink of collapse, its reputation in tatters. Mr. Aldridge, one of the board members, a stern-faced woman named Janet, addressed him. "While we appreciate your honesty in coming forward, the fact remains that Axiom conducted unethical experiments and then covered them up. The shareholders are calling for your resignation." Mason nodded, having expected this. "I understand, and I'm prepared to step down if that's what's best for the company. But before I do, I want to ensure that we make this right. The victims of our experiments, including Ava, deserve compensation and ongoing care." As the board deliberated, Mason's mind wandered to Ava. She had been dealing with her own challenges, grappling with her newfound identity as Eduardo's daughter, while also coming to terms with the full extent of what had been done to her by Axiom. Meanwhile, Ava found herself facing an unexpected ethical dilemma of her own. Her brother Tommy, still battling his chronic illness, had taken a turn for the worse. The doctors had suggested an experimental treatment, one that showed promise but was still in early trials. As Ava sat by Tommy's hospital bed, holding his frail hand, she couldn't help but see the parallels to her own situation. The allure of cutting-edge medical technology, the potential risks, the desperate hope for a cure, it was all painfully familiar. Eduardo, who had been getting to know his newfound family, entered the room quietly. "How is he?" he asked softly. Ava looked up at her biological father, still marveling at the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "Not good. The doctors are suggesting an experimental treatment, but after everything that's happened..." Eduardo nodded, understanding. "You're afraid of the risks." "It's not just that," Ava confessed. "Part of me wonders if I have the right to make this decision for him. After what happened to me with Axiom's experiments, how can I subject Tommy to something similar?" As they discussed the difficult decision ahead, Mason was facing his own ethical crossroads. Emily, true to her word, had come forward with all the information she had about Axiom's unethical practices, but her revelations had uncovered an even deeper layer of complexity. It turned out that Axiom's neural interface technology, despite its ethically dubious origins, had led to a breakthrough that could potentially revolutionize treatment for a range of neurological disorders, including the one Tommy was battling. Mason found himself in an impossible position. The technology that had caused so much harm, that had nearly destroyed his relationship with Ava and ruined his company, might now hold the key to saving her brother's life. As he mulled over this dilemma, Mason received an unexpected visit from Ava's adoptive parents. They had been quiet throughout the media storm, protecting Tommy from the stress of the situation, but now they came with a purpose. Mason, Ava's adoptive father, began, his voice heavy with emotion. We know you and Axiom have been through hell lately, but we've heard rumors about a new treatment your company has been developing. Is there any chance could it help Tommy?" The weight of their hope, coupled with the ethical implications of using the controversial technology, felt crushing. Mason closed his eyes, taking a deep breath before responding. "There might be," he said carefully, "but it's complicated. The treatment is derived from the same technology that hurt Ava. Using it, it's not a simple decision." As Mason explained the situation, he could see the conflict in their eyes, the desperate desire to save their son warring with the fear of subjecting him to potentially dangerous experimentation. Later that day, Mason, Ava, Eduardo, and Ava's adoptive parents gathered in a private room at the hospital. The atmosphere was tense as Mason laid out the facts about the experimental treatment. "The technology has shown incredible promise in early trials," he explained, "but it's still largely untested, and given its connection to the unethical experiments Axiom conducted, using it now, it's a moral minefield." Ava, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "What about the other victims of Axiom's experiments? Wouldn't using this technology be a betrayal of what they went through?" Eduardo leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. "But if the technology can help people now, isn't there a moral obligation to use it, to ensure that some good comes from all the suffering?" The debate raged on, each person grappling with the complex ethical implications. Emerson found himself torn between his desire to make amends for Axiom's past misdeeds and the potential to save lives with the technology they had developed. As the discussion reached a fever pitch, it was Ava who finally cut through the noise. "Ultimately," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "this has to be Tommy's decision. He's old enough to understand the risks and the ethical concerns. We should present him with all the information and let him choose." The room fell silent as the weight of Ava's words sank in. It was a profound moment of clarity amidst the chaos of conflicting loyalties and ethical dilemmas. With everyone in agreement, they approached Tommy's bedside. Gently, carefully, they explained the situation, the promise of the new treatment, its connection to Axiom, and the experiments Alv had undergone, and the potential risks involved. Tommy listened intently, his young face serious beyond his years. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "So on to try it," he said finally. "Not just for me, but for all the people it could help if it works. Maybe this is how we make something good come out of all the bad stuff that happened." His words, so full of courage and wisdom, brought tears to everyone's eyes. Ava hugged her brother tightly, a mix of pride and fear coursing through her. As the decision was made to move forward with Tommy's treatment, Mason realized that this moment represented a turning point, not just for Tommy, but for Axiom, for himself, and for the future of the technology they had created. In the days that followed, Mason worked tirelessly to ensure that the treatment for Tommy was administered with the utmost care and transparency. He insisted on full disclosure of the technology's origins and potential risks, not just to Tommy's family, but to the medical community and the public at large. This commitment to transparency and ethical use of the technology began to shift public perception of Axiom. While the company's reputation was far from restored, people began to see the potential for redemption, the possibility that out of the ashes of scandal, something truly beneficial could emerge. For Mason personally, this period was one of profound self-reflection and change. He stepped down as CEO of Axiom, but remained involved as an advisor, dedicated to steering the company towards more ethical practices and focusing its efforts on medical applications that could genuinely improve lives. Ava, for her part, found herself at a crossroads. As Tommy underwent treatment, she grappled with her own identity, daughter of Eduardo Mendoza, survivor of Axiom's experiments, and now a potential bridge between the world of cutting-edge technology and the human lives it could impact. As Tommy's condition began to improve, Ava made a decision that would shape her future. She decided to return to medical school, this time with a focus on bioethics and the intersection of technology and healthcare. Her unique perspective as both a victim and beneficiary of advanced medical technology, positioned her to become a powerful advocate for ethical innovation in the field. Eduardo, watching his newfound daughter forge her path, felt a complex mix of pride, regret for the years lost, and hope for the future. He committed himself to using his considerable resources and influence to support ethical research and development in the tech industry, with a particular focus on medical applications. And Mason, as he watched the ripple effects of their collective decisions spread out into the world, realized that sometimes the greatest innovations come not from technological breakthroughs, but from the difficult ethical choices we make in the face of complex dilemmas. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was illuminated by a sense of purpose and the possibility of redemption. A day before Tommy was set to be discharged from the hospital, his treatment having been a resounding success, Ava found herself standing alone on the rooftop garden of Mason's penthouse. The city sprawled before her, a tapestry of lights and shadows, much like the journey she had been through. As she contemplated the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Mason approaching, his face a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Ava," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "I've been looking for you." Ava smiled, a small, tentative thing. Just needed some air. Tomorrow's a big day. Mason nodded, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. Tommy's recovery was more than just a medical breakthrough. It was a symbol of redemption, of the possibility that good could come from even the darkest of circumstances. Mason began, but Ava held up a hand, stopping him. "Before you say anything, Mason, I need you to know something," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "These past few months have been the most challenging, confusing, and transformative of my life. I've discovered truths about my past, faced dangers I never imagined, and had to question everything I thought I knew about myself and the world." Mason listened intently, his heart racing with uncertainty about where Ava was leading. But through it all, Ava continued, "One thing has remained constant: my feelings for you." Mason's breath caught in his throat as Ava turned to face him fully. "I love you, Mason," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Despite everything, or maybe because of it, the man I have seen emerge from this crisis, the one who faced his mistakes head-on and fought to make things right, that's the man I want to build a future with." For a moment, Mason stood frozen, overwhelmed by Ava's words. Then, with a sound that was half laugh, half sob, he pulled her into his arms. "Ava, I love you too," he whispered fiercely. "I was so afraid I'd lost you for good, that the mistakes I'd made, the secrets I'd kept, that they'd created a chasm too wide to cross." As they held each other, the city lights twinkling around them, both felt a sense of coming home, of pieces falling into place. But their moment of peace was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Eduardo and Emily, both looking grave. "Mason, Ava," Eduardo said, his voice tight with tension, "we have a problem." The problem, it turned out, was a leaked document detailing the full extent of Axiom's past experiments, including information that implicated several high-ranking government officials who had turned a blind eye to the ethical violations in exchange for access to the technology. "This goes deeper than we thought," Emily explained, her face pale. "There are people in powerful positions who stand to lose everything if this information goes public." As the four of them huddled in Mason's office, discussing the implications of the leak and the potential backlash, a plan began to form. It was risky, potentially career-ending, but it offered a chance to expose the full truth and ensure that such ethical violations could never happen again. The next morning, as Tommy was being discharged from the hospital, Mason held a press conference. With Ava, Eduardo, and Emily by his side, he laid bare the entire story: Axiom's unethical experiments, the cover-up, the government complicity, but also the breakthrough that had saved Tommy's life and held promise for countless others. "We stand here today not to make excuses, but to take responsibility," Mason said, his voice steady despite the flashing cameras and murmuring reporters, "and to pledge that moving forward, Axiom will be at the forefront of ethical innovation, with transparency and human welfare as our guiding principles. The fallout was immediate and intense. Stock prices plummeted, investigations were launched, and for a time, it seemed as though everything they had fought for might crumble. But as the days turned to weeks and weeks to months, something unexpected happened. The public, initially outraged, began to rally behind Mason and Axiom's commitment to transparency and ethical reform. Other tech companies, facing pressure from their own employees and shareholders, began to follow suit, implementing stricter ethical guidelines and oversight. Tommy, now fully recovered, became a symbol of hope, his story inspiring a new generation of researchers committed to pushing the boundaries of science while respecting ethical limits. Avar, true to her word, returned to medical school, her unique perspective making her a rising star in the field of bioethics. She and Mason navigated the complexities of their relationship in the public eye, their love deepening as they faced each new challenge together. Eduardo, embracing his role as Ava's father, became a vocal advocate for ethical innovation in the tech industry, using his influence to bridge the gap between corporate interests and public welfare. And Emily, having faced the consequences of her actions, dedicated herself to helping other whistleblowers come forward, working to create a tech industry culture that valued ethical behavior above all else. 1 year after the press conference that had changed everything, Mason stood once again on the rooftop of his penthouse. But this time he wasn't alone. Ava was by his side, her hand in his, a simple gold band glinting on her finger. "Are you ready for this?" Ava asked, squeezing his hand. Mason looked at her, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "With you by my side, I'm ready for anything." As they turned to join their friends and family gathered for their engagement party, Mason reflected on the unexpected path that had led him here. He had lost an empire, but gained a family. He had faced his deepest flaws and emerged stronger, more human. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges yet to come. But as Mason looked at Ava, at the love and trust shining in her eyes, he knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. In the end, that was the greatest innovation of all, the capacity of the human heart to love, to forgive, and to grow. In the crucible of our deepest challenges, we often discover our truest selves. Mason and Ava's journey reminds us that love, in its purest form, isn't about perfection, but about growth and forgiveness. It teaches us that our past mistakes don't define us. It's how we choose to rectify them that shapes our legacy. Their story challenges us to look beyond surface judgments, to see the complex humanity in everyone we meet. It urges us to confront our ethical dilemmas head-on, knowing that the hardest choices often lead to the most profound transformations. In a world increasingly driven by technology, their tale is a poignant reminder that our most powerful innovation isn't found in circuits and code, but in the boundless capacity of the human heart to love, to heal, and to evolve. It whispers to us that redemption is possible, that second chances are precious, and that in the end, it's the connections we forge and the lives we touch that give our existence true meaning. Let their story inspire you to embrace your flaws, face your fears, and open your heart to unexpected love and growth. For in doing so, you may just discover the hero within yourself. We hope Mason and Ava's journey has touched your heart and perhaps even reflected some of your own experiences. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Consider leaving a comment with a simple one to let us know you enjoyed it. Your feedback means the world to us and helps shape our future content. If there were aspects of the story you disagreed with or would like to discuss further, please share your perspective in the comments. We value diverse opinions and believe they enrich our storytelling community. Lastly, if you'd like to support our team and stay updated on more captivating stories like this one, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support enables us to continue crafting narratives that explore the complexities of human emotions and relationships. Thank you for being part of our storytelling journey. We look forward to hearing from you and sharing more stories that inspire, challenge, and connect us all.